I pretended to be a poor, naive father at my son-in-law's family. The shocking truth I never told my son-in-law, that the bank foreclosing on his parents' mansion actually belongs to my holding company. To him I was just Harrison, the broke mechanic driving a rusted Ford F-150. He invited me to dinner to humiliate me, to show me my place among the elite. But he did not know that the VIP guest he was waiting for was actually my subordinate. By the time dessert was served, I owned his house, his debt, and his future. Before I tell you how I destroyed their ego, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you think family respect should be earned, not bought. The gravel crunched loudly under the tires of my 2005 Ford F-150 as I turned into the driveway of the sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. The truck was a beast of burden, much like myself. It had 300,000 miles on the odometer, and the muffler had developed a cough that sounded like a gunshot every time I took my foot off the gas pedal. In any other neighborhood, this truck would be seen as a reliable tool of the trade. Here, among the manicured hedges and marble fountains, it looked like a stain on a silk dress. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face was lined with 70 years of sun and hard labor. I wore my favorite Carhartt jacket, the canvas faded to a pale beige at the elbows, and a simple plaid shirt buttoned to the collar. I did not look like the founder of Bennett Logistics. I did not look like a man who signed checks that could buy this entire neighborhood. I looked exactly like what my daughter Lily had asked me to be, a simple, retired man living on a pension. As I shifted the truck into park, the engine gave one last violent shudder and died. Silence returned to the driveway, but it was broken almost immediately by a voice that dripped with annoyance. "Hey, you move that pile of scrap metal." I looked out the window. A man in his 60s was striding toward me. He was wearing a navy blue suit that shimmered a little too much under the porch lights. His shoes were patent leather, and his face was an unnatural shade of orange that spoke of too many hours in a tanning bed. This was Preston Sterling, the father of my son-in-law, Brandon. I opened the heavy door of my truck and stepped out. My work boots hit the pavement with a heavy thud. Before I could even open my mouth to introduce myself, Preston reached into his pocket and pulled out a key fob. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it at me. "Here, take the Porsche to the overflow lot around the back. And be careful, that car costs more than your entire life earnings." The keys sailed through the air. I did not raise my hand to catch them. I simply stood there, my hands deep in my jacket pockets, watching as the shiny fob hit the center of my chest and fell into the dirt with a pathetic clinking sound. Preston stopped, his jaw dropped slightly, his eyes widening in disbelief. He looked from the keys in the dirt to my face, his expression shifting from arrogance to pure anger. "Are you deaf or just stupid?" He snarled. I said, "Move your truck and park my car. We have a VIP guest arriving in 10 minutes, and I do not want this eyesore blocking the entrance." I looked down at the keys near my boots, then back up at him. I kept my voice calm, the same level tone I used when negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts with union leaders. "I am not the valet." Preston blinked. He took a step closer, squinting at me as if trying to decipher a foreign language. "Then who the hell are you?" he demanded. "The gardener. Did you come to fix the sprinklers?" "Use the service entrance on the side." I took a deep breath. I could smell the cheap cologne radiating off him. It was a scent trying too hard to mask the smell of desperation. I knew his type. I had fired dozens of men like him over the years, men who spent more time polishing their image than doing the work. "I am Harrison Bennett," I said quietly. "I am Lily's father." The silence that followed was heavy. Preston did not look embarrassed. He did not apologize. Instead, a slow, sneering smile spread across his face. He looked me up and down, taking in the frayed cuffs of my jacket and the oil stains on my boots. He let out a short, barking laugh. "Oh, I see, you are the mechanic." He said the word mechanic like it was a disease. He turned his head toward the house and shouted, "Brandon, your father-in-law is here." He parked his junk heap right in front of the fountain. He turned back to me, shaking his head with exaggerated pity. "My son told me you were a simple man, Harrison. I just did not realize you were this destitute. Look at this truck. It is leaking oil on my cobblestones. Do you have any idea how much it costs to clean imported stone?" I looked at the ground. There was indeed a small drop of oil, but I also looked at the cobblestones. My experience in logistics included building warehouses and paving miles of industrial lots. I knew stone. These were not imported. They were stamped concrete made to look like stone. Cheap, just like the man standing in front of me. I decided not to point that out, not yet. I am just here to see my daughter, I said. Preston waved his hand dismissively. Yes. Just move the truck, park it on the street outside the gate. I cannot have Mr. Jameson seeing this wreckage when he arrives. He is a man of significant importance. A captain of industry. Not exactly company you are used to keeping, I assume. Jameson, the name almost made me smile. Jameson was my chief operating officer. He was coming here on my orders to collect a debt. But Preston clearly thought he was coming to invest in some fantasy business venture. I was about to climb back into my truck to move it simply to avoid a scene when the front door of the mansion flew open. Dad, it was Lily, my little girl. She was wearing a dress that looked new and expensive, and her hair was done up in a complex twist. She looked beautiful, but her face was pale. She hurried down the steps, her high heels clicking rapidly on the concrete. For a second, I thought she was running to hug me. I braced myself, ready to catch her, just like I did when she was 5 years old, and scraped her knee. But she stopped 3 feet away. Her eyes darted to the neighbor's house, then to the street, then back to my truck. She did not look happy. She looked terrified. Dad, what are you doing? She hissed, her voice a harsh whisper. Why did you bring the truck? I looked at her, confused. It is my vehicle, Lily. It is how I get around. She grabbed my arm, not affectionately, but with a frantic grip. She pulled me slightly to the side, away from Preston, who was watching us with amusement. I told you to rent a sedan or take an Uber. Look at this thing, Dad. It is embarrassing. Brandon's parents are watching. The neighbors are watching. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This was the girl I had worked 18-hour days for. This was the girl whose college tuition I paid for in full, so she would never have to take a student loan. I remembered the nights I came home, smelling of diesel and grease, too tired to eat, but happy because I knew I was building a future for her. I thought you wanted me to come to dinner, I said, my voice sounding older than I felt. I did, she said, desperate tears forming in her eyes. But I asked you to try just for one night. Could you not just pretend to be normal? Normal to Lily, normal meant debt. It meant leasing cars you could not afford and wearing clothes you could not wash. To me, normal was honesty. Normal was owning what you had and not pretending to be something you were not. Preston cleared his throat loudly behind us. Tick-tock, people. The VIP is 10 minutes away. Move the truck or I will have it towed. Lily looked at me pleadingly. Please, Dad. Just move it. Park it down the block. And please, when we get inside, do not talk about the trucking business. Do not talk about fixing engines. Just say you are retired and living on Social Security. Please do it for me. I looked into her eyes. I searched for the daughter who used to sit in the cab of my truck and pretend to drive. I searched for the girl who used to tell me I was her hero. I could not find her. In front of me was a woman consumed by the need to impress people who did not care about her. Okay, Lily, I said softly. I will move the truck. She breathed out, relief washing over her face. She finally leaned in and gave me a quick, stiff hug, taking care not to let her dress touch my jacket. I climbed back into the driver's seat of my Ford. The engine roared to life with a loud bang that made Preston jump. I saw him sneer and dust off his suit jacket as if the noise itself had made him dirty. As I backed out of the driveway, I looked at the mansion again. It was big, it was flashy, but I knew something they did not. I knew the foundation was cracking, literally and financially. I drove the truck down the street and parked it under the shade of a large oak tree, away from the prying eyes of the Sterlings and their imaginary VIP guest. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment in the silence. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight. They wanted a poor, naive old man. They wanted a father who was a charity case. They wanted someone they could look down on to make themselves feel tall. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small black phone. It was not the cheap flip phone I carried in my pocket for show. This was a satellite-encrypted device. I checked the screen. One new message from Jameson. Boss, the paperwork is ready. We own the debt. I will be there in 20 minutes. I put the phone back and stepped out of the truck. The cool evening air hit my face. I smoothed down my Carhartt jacket. All right, Lily? I whispered to the empty street. You want me to play the part of the poor fool? I will play it, but you are going to hate the ending of this play. I began the long walk back to the gate, my heavy boots echoing on the pavement, marching toward a dinner that would cost them everything they had. Lily did not lead me through the front door. Instead, she took a sharp left, grabbing the rough fabric of my sleeve and pulling me toward the shadows of the detached three-car garage. The sun had fully set now, and the security lights hummed overhead, casting long clinical shadows against the white stucco walls. I stumbled slightly as she yanked me out of the view of the main house. I thought for a moment she wanted to talk privately, to ask how I was really doing. It had been 6 months since I last saw her. I wanted to tell her about the expansion of the Western distribution hub, or how I had finally decided to step down from the daily operations of the company. I wanted to tell her that I missed her mother, and that the big house felt empty without the noise of family. But when she finally let go of my arm, she did not look at my face. She looked at my boots. "Stand still, Dad," she commanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of anxiety and irritation. She reached out and began brushing invisible dust off the shoulder of my jacket. Her hands were frantic. She picked at a loose thread on my collar. She smoothed down the front of my plaid shirt as if she could somehow iron out the working-class reality of my appearance with her manicured fingernails. "Lily," I said softly, trying to catch her eye, "I am fine. The clothes are clean. I washed them this morning." She finally looked up, and what I saw in her eyes broke my heart more than any business failure ever could. It was shame, pure, unadulterated shame. "It is not about being clean, Dad," she hissed, keeping her voice low so the guests inside would not hear. "It is about fitting in. You know how Brandon's parents are. They are particular. They value presentation." I looked at her. My little girl, I remembered the day she was born. I was driving a delivery route in Ohio when I got the call. I drove 10 hours straight back to the hospital. I walked in smelling of diesel and sweat, and when I held her, she did not care about presentation. She just held my finger. Now, she was afraid to touch me. "What do you want me to do?" "Lily," I asked, "do you want me to leave?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "No, you cannot leave. That would be rude. But please, just listen to me. Tonight is important. Brandon is trying to close a deal with his father. They are talking about millions of dollars. Dad, millions." I oppressed a scoff. I knew exactly how much money Preston Sterling had because I had read his credit report 20 minutes ago. The man was drowning in debt, but Lily did not know that. She was blinded by the illusion of wealth. "So what is the plan?" I asked, my voice flat. She took a deep breath, wringing her hands together. "Please, just do not talk about the trucks. Do not tell stories about the diners you eat at or the tires you change. If they ask you about your career, just keep it vague." "Vague," I repeated. "Yes," she said, her eyes pleading. "Actually, maybe it is better if you just say you are retired. Tell them you live on a small fixed income. Tell them you are on government assistance, Social Security. Maybe even say you need a little help with medical bills." I felt a coldness spread through my chest. It was a physical sensation like ice water being poured into my veins. "You want me to tell them I am a beggar?" I asked slowly. "I want you to lower their expectations," she said, desperate now. "If they think you have nothing, they will not judge you for looking like this. They will just pity you, and pity is better than judgment. Dad, please, just swallow your pride for 3 hours. Do it for me." I looked down at my hands. They were large hands, calloused and scarred from years of manual labor before I moved to the boardroom. These hands had repaired engines in freezing rain. These hands had gripped steering wheels for 20 hours, straight, to make a delivery deadline. And these hands had written the check for her college tuition. I remembered that day vividly. She had been accepted to a prestigious private university on the East Coast. The tuition was $50,000 a semester. I sat at the kitchen table with my checkbook. My wife was worried about the cost, but I told her not to worry. I wrote that check with pride. I wrote check after check for 4 years, hundreds of thousands of dollars, so she could have a degree, so she could walk in worlds I was never invited to. I never told her how hard I worked to cover those checks. I never told her about the contracts I fought for, or the competitors I crushed to ensure her future. I let her think it was easy. I let her think money just appeared. And now, because I had shielded her from the struggle, She was ashamed of the source. She wanted me to play the role of a failure because she could not accept that her father was a success on his own terms. "Okay, Lily," I said finally, my voice barely a whisper. "I will do it. I will be the poor old man on Social Security." She let out a breath she had been holding, and her shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you, Dad," she said. "You have no idea how much this means to me. Brandon is under so much pressure. We just need tonight to go smoothly." She reached out to hug me again, but stopped herself. Instead, she patted my arm awkwardly. "Just try not to eat too fast," she added, "and use the napkin. Victoria hates it when people wipe their mouths with their hands." Before I could respond, the side door of the garage opened. Lights spilled out onto the driveway, illuminating us like deer in headlights. Brandon stepped out. My son-in-law looked every bit the part of a man trying to convince the world he was important. He was wearing a suit that was cut too slim for his frame, and a watch that was too big for his wrist. I recognized the watch immediately. It was a knockoff of a Rolex Submariner. I knew because I owned 3 real ones. His had the wrong bezel thickness. He saw us standing there and checked his phone with an exaggerated sigh. "Jesus, Lily," he said, his voice dripping with impatience. "What are you doing out here?" "My mother is asking for the hors d'oeuvre, and the VIP guest is going to be here any minute." "I was just helping Dad," Lily said quickly, stepping away from me as if I were contagious. He got lost finding the door. Brandon turned his eyes to me. There was no warmth in them, no respect. He looked at me the way one looks at a stain on a carpet that refuses to come out. "Well, hurry up," he snapped. "And Dad, do me a favor, try to stand downwind of the guests. You smell like a gas station." I did not smell like gas. I smelled like expensive sandalwood soap and the crisp mountain air of my estate in Montana. But Brandon only smelled what he wanted to smell. He smelled his own prejudice. He reached up and adjusted his tie. It was a bright red silk tie with a Gucci pattern. I could tell from 5 feet away that the stitching was uneven. "Nice tie, Brandon," I said, keeping my face neutral. He puffed out his chest slightly. "Thanks, it is imported. Cost a fortune. But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" He laughed, a short, cruel sound. "Come on inside, and try not to touch the walls. We just had them painted." He turned on his heel and walked back toward the house, not waiting to see if we followed. Lily gave me one last pleading look before hurrying after him. I stood there for a moment alone in the dark driveway. I reached into my pocket and touched the cold metal of my phone. "Imported," I whispered to myself. I knew exactly where that tie came from. It came from a shipping container in one of my warehouses in Newark, seized by customs last month for trademark infringement. It was garbage, just like the man wearing it. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool night air. I was about to walk into a lion's den, armed only with my wits and a secret that could level this entire house. They wanted a show. They wanted a poor, helpless old man to kick around. I adjusted my collar and began to walk toward the light. I would give them the performance of a lifetime, and then I would bring down the curtain. The transition from the cool night air into the foyer of the Sterling estate was like stepping into a museum dedicated to bad taste. The air inside was thick with the smell of synthetic lavender air freshener, masking the faint underlying odor of damp drywall. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, but they were hung too low, creating a claustrophobic feeling rather than one of grandeur. I wiped my boots on the welcome mat carefully, even though they were already clean. But I knew it would not matter. In this house, I was the dirt. We moved toward the dining room. The space was cavernous, painted in a shade of gold that was meant to look royal, but ended up looking like mustard under the harsh recessed lighting. A long table dominated the room, set for 6 people. The centerpiece was a massive floral arrangement that looked plastic even from the doorway. And then I saw her, Victoria Sterling. She was standing at the head of the table, adjusting a napkin with the precision of a surgeon. She was a woman who was fighting a losing battle against age with the help of aggressive plastic surgery and layers of makeup that cracked when she smiled. She wore a dress that shimmered with sequins and enough jewelry to sink a small boat. When she saw us enter, her eyes bypassed her son and her daughter-in-law completely. They landed directly on my feet. Her smile vanished. Her lips thinned into a straight line of pure disgust. She did not say hello. She did not welcome me to her home. She simply pointed a manicured finger at my boots. Oh my God, look at the floor. She let out a gasp that was theatrical enough to win an award. She rushed forward, stopping 5 feet away, as if afraid that the poverty radiating off me might stain her dress. Brandon, I told you to make him take those things off. We have Italian marble in here. Do you know how porous marble is? If he tracks oil or mud in here, it will never come out. I looked down at the floor. It was not Italian marble. It was high-gloss ceramic tile printed with a marble pattern. I had transported tons of this material for budget hotel renovations. It was durable, cheap, and about as porous as a plastic cup. But I said nothing. I just stood there, letting her perform her outrage. Mom, he wiped his feet, Lily said, her voice small and trembling. It is fine. It is not fine. Victoria snapped, her eyes blazing. She turned her head toward the kitchen door and screamed. Maria, Maria, get in here right now. A small, nervous woman in a maid uniform hurried out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked tired. I recognized the look of an employee who was overworked and underpaid. Yes, Mrs. Sterling, Maria said, keeping her head bowed. Victoria pointed at the chair in the far corner of the table, the one furthest from the head where Preston would sit. Get the newspapers, the ones from the recycling bin. I want you to cover that chair. Every inch of it, the seat, the backrest, everything. Maria looked confused for a second, glancing from Victoria to me and back again. She saw a guest standing there, an older man, and the hesitation on her face showed she had a conscience. The newspapers, ma'am, for the chair? Yes, for the chair, Victoria hissed. Do you think I am going to let him sit on my imported leather with those work clothes? That is custom furniture, Maria. It is handcrafted in Milan. I will not have it ruined by grease and grime. I felt my blood pressure rise, but I kept my face impassive. I looked at the chair she was protecting so fiercely. It was a high-backed dining chair with dark wood legs and creamy beige upholstery. It certainly looked expensive to the untrained eye. As Maria scurried away to fetch the trash, I walked slowly toward the chair. I reached out and ran my hand along the backrest. To the casual observer, it felt smooth and supple, but my fingers told a different story. I had spent 40 years in logistics. I had shipped everything from raw steel to delicate electronics. I knew materials. Real Italian leather has a distinctive grain, a warmth that responds to human touch. It breathes. It has imperfections that prove its authenticity. This material was cold. It was lifeless. It was perfectly uniform because it was synthetic. I pressed my thumb into the cushion. It did not wrinkle like skin. It bounced back with a rubbery resistance. This was bonded leather, a slurry of leather scraps and polyurethane sprayed over a fabric backing. And the frame underneath was not solid oak or mahogany. I could tell by the weight and the hollow sound it made when my boot grazed the leg. It was compressed wood pulp. I knew this chair intimately. In fact, I knew exactly where it came from. My company, Bennett Logistics, had secured a massive contract last year to handle the shipping for a discount furniture manufacturer based in Shenzhen. We had moved 50,000 units of this exact model to a chain of budget home stores across the Midwest. The wholesale price on the manifest was $48.50 per unit. Victoria probably paid $500 for it, believing the lie on the price tag, just like she believed the lie of her own importance. She was protecting a $50 fake with the ferocity of a museum curator protecting a Picasso. Maria returned, with a stack of old newspapers. Her hands were shaking slightly as she approached me. She whispered a quiet apology that only I could hear as she began to lay the papers over the beige upholstery. She covered the seat. She draped the sports section over the back. She even put a coupon circular on the floor under the table for my feet. It was a spectacle of humiliation. I stood there and watched as my seat was prepared like a crate for a dirty dog. Lily had turned away, pretending to admire a painting on the wall to hide her tears. Brandon was checking his reflection in the china cabinet, ignoring the scene entirely. There, Victoria said, clapping her hands together as if she had just solved a global crisis. That should protect the investment. You can sit now, Mr. Harrison. She gestured to the newspaper-covered chair with a benevolent smile, as if she were doing me a favor. I stepped forward. The newspapers crinkled loudly as I sat down. The sound was sharp and jarring in the quiet room. Crunch, crinkle, snap. Every movement I made created a cacophony of noise, drawing attention to my presence, drawing attention to my status as the outsider. I settled into the chair. The fake leather beneath the paper felt hard and unforgiving. I rested my arms on the table, being careful not to let my sleeves touch the tablecloth. Victoria took her seat at the opposite end of the table. She smoothed her dress and looked at me with a tilt of her head. A look of faux sympathy plastered across her face. "You must forgive me for being so particular," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We just value quality in this house. We work very hard to surround ourselves with the finer things." She paused, waiting for me to acknowledge her superiority. When I just stared back at her, she continued, her smile widening into a smirk. "Besides, I am sure you are more comfortable this way. I imagine you are not used to sitting on such delicate furniture. Someone in your line of work probably feels more at home on a plastic folding chair, or perhaps a straw mat on the floor. Am I right?" She laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves like metal on glass. Brandon joined in, chuckling as he poured himself a glass of water. "Yeah, Dad is not big on luxury, Mom," Brandon said. "He thinks a recliner from the thrift store is high class." I sat there on my throne of garbage, listening to the crinkle of the newsprint beneath me. I looked at the woman who thought she was a queen. I looked at the son-in-law who thought he was a prince. And I looked at the cheap factory-made chair that they worshipped as a throne. They were drowning in debt, borrowing money to buy trash that looked like treasure, while mocking the man who could buy their entire reality with the change in his pocket. "It is fine, Victoria," I said, my voice steady and calm. "I understand completely. You have to protect what you own, especially when it is so fragile." I ran my finger along the edge of the table. It was veneer, not solid wood, just another layer of fake on top of fake. "I am very comfortable," I added. Victoria beamed, satisfied that she had put me in my place. She picked up a small silver bell and rang it. "Good. Now that we are all settled, let us have some wine. Brandon, bring out the reserve, the bottle we have been saving for the investor. Let us give Mr. Harrison a taste of what real success tastes like." As Brandon moved to the sideboard to get the wine, I shifted in my seat. The newspaper beneath me shifted, revealing a headline from the business section near my thigh. It was an article about the rising cost of bankruptcy filings in the state of Connecticut. I suppressed a smile. The irony was delicious. I was literally sitting on their future. I adjusted my napkin and prepared myself. The chair was fake. The marble was fake. The leather was fake. And soon I would find out if the wine was fake, too. But the lesson I was about to teach them, that would be very real. The silence in the dining room was only broken by the sound of Preston clearing his throat, a sound that demanded attention like a gavel in a courtroom. He walked over to the mahogany sideboard, which was actually particle board with a veneer finish, and picked up a bottle of wine that had been sitting there like a sacred relic. He held it by the neck, cradling the base with his other hand, presenting it to the room as if he were holding the Holy Grail. "Gentlemen and ladies," Preston announced, his voice booming with self-importance. "Tonight is a celebration of new beginnings, so I decided to open something truly special from my private cellar. This is a Chateau Lafite Rothschild 1982. He paused for effect, waiting for the gasps of admiration. Brandon let out a low whistle of appreciation, shaking his head in disbelief. "No way, Dad," Brandon said, eyes wide. "That bottle is worth like $3,000. Are you serious? We are going to drink that tonight." Preston smiled, a benevolent grin that did not reach his cold eyes. He walked around the table, holding the bottle out so everyone could see the label. It looked old. The paper was yellowed and slightly peeling at the corners. And there was a layer of dust on the glass that looked suspiciously uniform, like it had been applied with a spray can. "For the right occasion, nothing is too expensive," Preston said. "And with the deal we are about to close tonight, I think we deserve the best." He produced a corkscrew and began the ritual of opening the bottle. He made a show of cutting the foil, twisting the screw, and pulling the cork with a dramatic pop. He sniffed the cork, closing his eyes and letting out a moan of pleasure that made me want to gag. "Exquisite," he whispered. "Simply exquisite. The tannins have matured perfectly." He moved around the table, pouring the dark red liquid into the large crystal goblets. "First for Victoria," who held her glass out with a trembling hand, as if receiving a sacrament. Then for Lily, who looked terrified that she might spill a drop on the tablecloth. Then he poured a generous amount for Brandon. Finally, he filled his own glass. He stopped when he reached my corner of the table. He looked at my empty glass, then at the bottle, then at me. A look of mock consideration crossed his face. "Oh, Harrison, I almost forgot." He set the wine bottle down on the table with a heavy thud and reached for a glass pitcher of water that was sitting near the centerpiece. "I know a man of your simple tastes might find a vintage like this a bit overwhelming. It is very complex, very dry. It is not like that sweet boxed wine or the cheap beer you are probably used to drinking after a shift at the garage." He poured water into my glass. It was lukewarm. I could see the condensation on the pitcher was gone. "Besides," he continued, his voice dripping with condescension, "it would be a sin to waste a $3,000 bottle on a palate that cannot distinguish between a Bordeaux and grape juice. You understand, right? We do not want to cast pearls before swine, as the saying goes." I looked at the water in my glass. Then I looked at the ruby-red liquid in Brandon's glass, sitting just inches away from my hand. "I understand perfectly, Preston," I said, keeping my voice level. "I would hate to be a burden on your hospitality." Preston smirked and raised his glass for a toast. "To prosperity," he said, "and to those who have the vision to seize it." They all clinked glasses. The sound of crystal ringing filled the room. I lifted my water glass and took a sip. It tasted of chlorine, tap water. He had not even bothered to filter it. As they took their first sips, murmuring their exaggerated approvals, I leaned slightly toward Brandon. "Can I just see the color?" I asked innocently. I have never seen a $3,000 wine before. Brandon hesitated for a second, clutching his glass like a child guarding a toy, but then he shrugged. He pushed the glass slightly toward me, his expression one of pity. "Sure, Dad, take a look. Just do not touch the rim. I do not want grease on the glass." I leaned in. I did not need to touch it. I just needed to be close enough for my olfactory senses to take over. I had spent 40 years entertaining clients in the finest restaurants in New York, Paris, and Tokyo. I had shared bottles of real Rothschild with heads of state. I knew the smell of old money. I inhaled deeply. The first thing that hit me was the smell of sulfur. A sharp chemical sting that indicates cheap mass-produced wine where preservatives are pumped in to extend shelf life. Beneath the sulfur was the cloying scent of artificial oak flavoring. Real wine gets its oak notes from aging in barrels for years. Cheap wine gets it from adding sawdust chips to the steel fermentation tanks. And then there was the fruit. It did not smell like aged currants or blackberries. It smelled like jam, sugary, overripe jam. I glanced at the bottle on the table again. From this angle, I could see the back label. The font was slightly blurry. A high-quality printer would never leave blurry edges. And the dust on the bottle was gray, not the brownish dust of a cellar. It was vacuum cleaner dust stuck on with hairspray. This was not a 1982 Rothschild. This was a $12 bottle of generic red blend, probably bought at a gas station or a bulk discount store, decanted into an old bottle and sealed with a fake cork. It was the beverage equivalent of Preston himself, flashy on the outside, rotten on the inside. I looked up to see Preston watching me closely, waiting for me to look jealous, waiting for me to look defeated. I decided to give him what he wanted. I pulled back from the glass and shook my head, my eyes wide with feigned wonder. "Wow," I whispered. Preston leaned forward, eager for the praise. "What is it, Harrison?" "What do you smell?" "I smell money," I said, letting a tone of awe creep into my voice. "It smells thick, like, it has been waiting a long time. I have never smelled anything like that in my life." Which was technically true. I had never smelled anything that awful passed off as something that expensive. Preston leaned back in his chair, satisfied. He took another large gulp of the swill, swishing it around in his mouth and swallowing with a loud gulp. "Exactly," he said, wiping his lips with a linen napkin. "That is the smell of sophistication, Harrison. It is a world you can only observe from the outside. But do not feel bad. Not everyone is cut out for the finer things. Some people are meant to drive the trucks, and some people are meant to own the cargo. It is just the natural order of things." He set his glass down, and the playful mockery in his eyes suddenly vanished, replaced by a sharp predatory glint. The theater of the wine was over. The appetizer of humiliation had been served. Now it was time for the main course. He clasped his hands together on the table and looked directly at me, ignoring Lily and Victoria. Speaking of the natural order, Harrison, we should probably discuss why we really invited you here tonight. We are family after all, and family helps each other, especially when there is a massive opportunity on the table. I saw Brandon straighten up in his chair. This was the rehearsed part. This was the moment they had been building up to. I took another sip of my chlorine water and set the glass down carefully on the newspaper. Yes, I am listening, I said. Preston smiled, but this time it was not a smile of vanity. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. He thought he was the shark. He did not know he was swimming with a leviathan. Good, he said, because what I am about to propose is going to change your daughter's life. And yours too, if you are smart enough to listen. The lights in the dining room dimmed automatically, controlled by a smart home system that probably cost more than Brandon made in a year. A portable projector screen had been set up in front of the bay window, blocking the view of the garden. And suddenly, the room was bathed in a harsh blue light. Brandon stood next to the screen, holding a small remote control, clicking it with the authority of a general commanding an army. But he was not a general. He was a boy playing dress-up. A logo flashed onto the screen. It was a green leaf intertwined with a dollar sign. The words, Green Horizon Eco Resorts, appeared beneath it in a font that tried too hard to look modern. Brandon cleared his throat and began to pace back and forth, his hands moving in practiced gestures that he had likely learned from watching motivational speakers on YouTube. The future of real estate is not in ownership, he declared, his voice rising. It is in experiences. We are building a fully sustainable off-grid luxury retreat for the digital nomad generation. Solar power, hydroponic gardens, cryptocurrency integration for all payments. It is not just a resort, it is a revolution. I sat there in the dark, sipping my tap water and watching the slide deck. To the untrained eye, it looked impressive. There were renderings of glass pods in the forest, smiling young people holding tablets, and graphs with lines that only went up. But I was not an untrained eye. I had built a logistics empire from a single truck. I knew how to read a business plan, and what I was looking at was not a business plan. It was a fantasy. I looked at the revenue model slide. It was nonsense. They projected 90% occupancy in the first month with zero marketing budget. They listed projected income based on tokenized assets that did not even exist yet. There was no line item for insurance, no line item for maintenance, no line item for regulatory compliance. It was a classic Ponzi structure wrapped in greenwashing buzzwords, meant to trap investors who cared more about feeling virtuous than making a profit. Preston was nodding along vigorously, his face illuminated by the blue light of the screen. Brilliant, son, simply brilliant, he murmured. The synergy is undeniable. Brandon clicked to the next slide. It showed a pie chart with a large slice missing. We have already secured 80% of the seed capital from private equity firms in Silicon Valley. Brandon lied smoothly. I knew he was lying because private equity does not invest in slide decks with typos. I had spotted 3 spelling errors already. We just need one final partner to close the round. We need someone who understands the value of land, someone who wants to leave a legacy. The room went silent. The projector hummed loudly in the quiet. Brandon turned slowly to face me. The predatory glint was back in his eyes, but he masked it with a smile that was supposed to be warm and inviting. Dad, he said, stepping closer to the table, we want to give you this opportunity. We know you do not have cash savings. We know things have been tight for you since you retired. But you have something else. You have equity. I put my glass down on the newspaper-covered table. I knew exactly where this was going. Equity? I repeated, playing the part of the confused old man. Yes, Brandon said, leaning in. That old cabin of yours, the one up by the lake, and the 10 acres of woods surrounding it. I felt a muscle in my jaw tighten. That cabin was not just an old building. It was where I had taken my late wife for our honeymoon 50 years ago, because we could not afford a hotel. It was where I sat on the porch and watched the sunrise, when the noise of the business world became too loud. And the land was even more precious. For the past 2 years, I had been quietly working with the county zoning board. I had spent thousands on environmental impact studies and architectural plans. I was not going to sell it. I was going to build the Bennett Home for Children, a sanctuary for orphans and foster kids who had nowhere else to go. The land was currently valued at $2 million because of the commercial rezoning approval I had just received last week. An approval that was sitting in a safe in my office. But to Brandon and Preston, it was just a rotting shack in the woods, worth a couple of $100,000 at best. We checked the tax records, Dad, Brandon continued, oblivious to the fire burning inside me. The bank appraisal for the raw land is around $200,000. That is exactly the buy-in amount for the founder tier of our project. He clicked the remote again, showing a slide with a picture of a golden key. If you sign the deed over to us as collateral, we can get a loan against the land tomorrow. We put the money into Green Horizon, and in 3 months, when we launch the token sale, we pay off the loan and you get your deed back. Plus 5% of the company. You will be rich, Dad. You will never have to drive that old truck again. Preston chimed in, his voice oily and persuasive. It is a no-brainer, Harrison. The land is just sitting there doing nothing. It is a dead asset. Let the boys turn it into a gold mine. Think of it as your contribution to Lily's future. Do you not want your daughter to be the wife of a mogul? I looked at Lily. She was staring at her plate, her hands twisting a napkin into a tight knot. She knew how much I loved that cabin. She knew I had planned to retire there before I decided to turn it into an orphanage. But she said nothing. Her silence was a betrayal louder than any scream. I looked back at Brandon. He was waiting, his hand extended, as if expecting me to shake it right then and there. Let me get this straight, I said slowly, keeping my voice steady. You want me to mortgage my home? The only thing I own free and clear. And you want me to give you the money for a business that has not built a single room yet? It is not a mortgage, Dad. It is leverage, Brandon corrected me, sounding annoyed that I was not jumping for joy. And we have not built yet because we are smart. We are lean. That is how modern business works. I leaned back in the creaking chair. And what if it fails? I asked. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Brandon blinked, as if I had just spoken in a different language. What? He asked. What if the project fails? I said louder this time. What if nobody buys the tokens? What if the zoning board denies your permits for the glass pods? What if the crypto market crashes? If the business fails, the bank takes my land. I lose my home, I lose everything. What is the guarantee, Brandon? Brandon let out a sharp, exasperated breath. He looked at his father, then back at me, shaking his head with a look of pure disdain. Preston laughed, a harsh mocking sound. Oh, Harrison, you really are a simpleton, aren't you? Brandon slammed the remote down on the table. The sound made Lily jump. This is exactly why you are poor, Dad. Brandon spat the words out. This is why you spent your whole life fixing other people's cars instead of owning the dealership. You are paralyzed by fear. You have a poverty mindset. He walked around the table, looming over me. Rich people do not ask, what if it fails? They ask, how big will it win? You are thinking about protecting a rotting piece of wood in the middle of nowhere, while I am trying to build an empire. I am trying to help you. I am trying to pull you out of the mud, but you are too busy hugging the dirt to notice. He gestured to the screen where the dollar sign was still glowing. You think small, Harrison. That is your problem. You have always thought small. That is why you drive a truck. That is why you sit on newspapers. And that is why you are going to stay a loser, unless you listen to people who are smarter than you. I looked up at him. I looked at his cheap suit. I looked at his desperate eyes. He was talking about being smart while trying to hustle a man who had forgotten more about business than he would ever learn. He called it a poverty mindset. I called it risk management, but I did not say that. I just looked at him with the wide, watery eyes of a scared old man. I just do not want to be homeless, Brandon, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Brandon rolled his eyes and looked at Lily. Talk to him, Lily. Explain it to him before I lose my patience. We need that deed signed tonight. The bank is expecting the paperwork first thing in the morning. He turned his back on me, walking over to pour himself another glass of the fake wine, confident that he had already won. He did not see the look on my face change. He did not see the calculation in my eyes. He wanted the deed. Fine, I would give him a piece of paper, but it would not be the paper he thought it was. And the lesson I was about to teach him would cost a lot more than $200,000. The room fell into a silence so heavy, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the ventilation system. Brandon was breathing hard, his chest heaving slightly from his speech. He stared at me, waiting for me to pull out a pen and sign away my life. But I just sat there. I kept my hands folded on the table, resting on the sports section of the newspaper Victoria had insisted on. My face was a mask of confusion and hesitation. I did not say no, I did not say yes, I just let the silence hang there. It is a negotiation tactic I learned 3 decades ago. When you want to see someone's true colors, you just stop talking. Silence makes liars nervous. It makes them fill the void with their insecurities. And sure enough, the Sterlings began to crack. Victoria was the first to speak. She did not look at me. She turned her head slowly toward Lily, her diamond earrings catching the blue light from the projector screen. "Oh dear," she sighed, a sound that was meant to convey disappointment, but sounded more like a hiss. "I am confused, Lily. I thought you told us your father was a devoted family man. I thought you said he would do anything for you." Lily flinched, as if her mother-in-law had thrown the wine in her face, rather than just words. She looked up from her lap, her eyes wide and fearful. "He is," Lily stammered. "He is a good father, he loves me." Victoria set the glass down with a sharp click against the table. "Does he really?" she asked, her voice dripping with poison disguised as concern. "Because, from where I am sitting, it looks like he cares more about a dilapidated shack in the woods than he cares about your future. We are offering you a chance to enter high society, Lily. To be secure, to be respected, and your father is standing in the way because of what? Sentimental attachment to some firewood?" Preston leaned in, sensing the opening. "Victoria is right. You have to think about the optics here, Harrison. Your daughter married into the Sterling family. She represents us now. And quite frankly, having a father who lives in squalor is an embarrassment. We are trying to elevate her. We are trying to elevate you. The least you can do is show a little gratitude and sign the paper." "Gratitude," softly. "Yes, gratitude." Brandon snapped. "Do you know how hard I had to fight to get my partners to agree to let you in on this? They wanted a Silicon Valley angel investor. I told them no. I want my father-in-law. I want to keep the wealth in the family. And this is how you repay me. By dragging your feet like a stubborn mule?" I looked at Lily again. Her face was buried in her hands. She was crying softly, but she still did not speak up. She did not defend me. She was too terrified of losing her fake prince to realize he was just a jester in a rented crown. Before I could say another word, the sharp chime of the front doorbell echoed through the mansion. Preston immediately stopped glaring at me. His posture shifted instantly from aggressive predator to obsequious servant. He smoothed his tie, patted his orange hair, and plastered a wide, fake smile on his face. "That must be Mr. Jameson," Preston whispered excitedly. "The VIP, the man with the final check. Everyone, look sharp, Lily. Stop crying, Harrison. Do not speak unless spoken to, and for God's sake, try not to crinkle the newspaper." He practically sprinted out of the dining room toward the foyer. I heard the heavy wooden door swing open. "Mr. Jameson, welcome to the Sterling estate. It is an absolute honor to have you in our home." Preston's voice was loud, excessively enthusiastic. "Please, come in, come in. Let me take your coat. We have a glass of 82 Rothschild waiting for you in the dining room." "I will keep my coat," a deep, familiar voice replied. It was calm, measured, and entirely uninterested in Preston's flattery. "And I do not drink while I am working." Footsteps approached the dining room. Preston walked in backwards, bowing slightly. Leading the way for the VIP, Jameson stepped into the room. He was wearing a sharply tailored charcoal suit. He carried a sleek black leather briefcase. He looked exactly like what he was, a highly paid, highly effective corporate assassin. He ignored Preston completely. He did not look at Victoria. He did not look at Brandon. His eyes swept the room and locked directly onto me. "Boss," Jameson said clearly, giving me a respectful nod. "Sorry I am late. Traffic on the Merritt Parkway was worse than usual." The room froze. It was a complete, suspended animation. Preston stopped bowing. His smile cracked. He looked from Jameson to me, then back to Jameson. "Boss?" Preston echoed, his voice a confused whisper. "Mr. Jameson, I think there has been a misunderstanding. This is Harrison. He is the mechanic. He is Brandon's father-in-law." Jameson finally turned to look at Preston. He looked at him with the same detached clinical interest one might use to examine a dead bug on a windshield. "I know who he is, Mr. Sterling," Jameson said smoothly. "He is Harrison Bennett, founder and CEO of Bennett Logistics, chairman of the Bennett Holding Corporation, and my boss for the last 15 years. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was deafening. I could hear the faint hum of the projector fan, but nothing else. Victoria's jaw went slack. The fake wine in Brandon's glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. The dark liquid splattered across the cheap tiles, but Victoria did not even notice. Bennett Holding Corporation? Brandon stammered, the color draining from his face completely. "That is correct," I said. I stood up. The newspaper crinkled loudly as I rose, but this time, it did not sound like humiliation. It sounded like the crack of thunder. I picked up the coupon circular by my feet and tossed it onto the table. I picked up the sports section, draped over the back of the chair, and threw it over the fake floral centerpiece. I looked down at the beige chair. "By the way, Victoria," I said casually, my voice carrying easily across the large room. "This chair is not handcrafted in Milan. It was assembled in Shenzhen from bonded leather scraps and compressed wood pulp. My company shipped 50,000 of them last October. Wholesale price is $48. You got ripped off." Victoria let out a small, strangled gasp and covered her mouth with her hands. I turned my attention to Preston. The fake tan on his face now looked sickly against the sudden paleness of his skin. "And the wine is a $12 generic blend," I continued, pointing to the dusty bottle. "You forgot to wipe the hairspray off the label when you glued the dust on." Preston swallowed hard. He looked terrified. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on train tracks, and the train was inches away. "Harrison, we had no idea," Preston stuttered. We were just joking earlier, you know how it is. Just men testing each other." "I am not testing you, Preston," I said coldly. "I am ending you." I turned to Jameson. "Do you have the paperwork?" "Right here, sir," Jameson said. He placed the black briefcase on the table, clicked the locks open, and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He slid them across the table toward me. I picked up the top document and looked at it. Then I looked at Brandon. Green Horizon Eco Resorts. I read the name slowly, letting the absurdity of it hang in the air. "A very ambitious project, Brandon, very visionary, but you made one critical mistake." What mistake?" Brandon whispered. "You lied on your loan applications," I said flatly. "You told the private equity firm that you had secured the land in Montana as collateral. You forged a letter of intent using my forged signature." Brandon's knees buckled slightly. He grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. How do you know that?" "Because Bennett Holding Corporation recently acquired the primary debt portfolio of the venture capital firm you pitched last week," I said. "We audit all incoming risk. When my analysts saw a forged document with my own name on it, they brought it directly to my desk." I dropped the document onto the table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. "That is criminal fraud. Brandon, a federal offense." I turned to Preston. He was sweating now. Actual beads of sweat were ruining his orange tan. "But I did not just look into Brandon's affairs," I said softly. "I looked into yours as well, Preston. You like to talk about the natural order of things. You like to talk about who owns the cargo and who drives the trucks. Well, let us talk about who owns this house." I picked up the second document. "You are 4 months behind on your primary mortgage. You have taken out 2 secondary loans against the equity, and you defaulted on the margin call for your stock portfolio yesterday morning. The bank was preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings on this estate by Friday. Please, Harrison," Preston begged, holding his hands up in a desperate gesture of surrender. "We can work something out. We are family. We are not family." I corrected him. "We are creditors and debtors. When I saw the foreclosure notice, I instructed Jameson to buy the paper from the bank. I paid in cash, at a significant premium, just to expedite the transfer." I slid the document across the table. It stopped right in front of Preston's empty wine glass. "I own the debt on this house," I stated clearly. "I own the secondary loans. I own the cars in the driveway, including the Porsche you were so worried about. I own it all." Victoria burst into tears. It was an ugly, loud sobbing that ruined her carefully applied makeup. What are you going to do?" Brandon asked, his voice cracking. I am going to do exactly what you wanted to do to me, I said. I am going to take your home, but unlike you, I am doing it legally, Jameson. What is the timeline? The foreclosure is immediate, sir, due to the multiple breaches of the loan covenants, Jameson replied smoothly. The eviction notice is effective as of midnight tonight. The sheriff's department has already been notified and is standing by to enforce the order. Midnight? Preston gasped. But we have nowhere to go. You cannot just throw us out on the street. I am not throwing you on the street, I said, putting my hands in my pockets. You threw yourselves out when you decided to build a life on lies and credit. I am simply the repo man coming to collect. I looked at Lily. She had not moved. She had not spoken. She was staring at me with a look of absolute horror, tears streaming down her face. Dad, she whispered. Please, do not do this. He is my husband. I looked at my daughter, the girl I had worked so hard to protect, the girl who had been so ashamed of my boots that she hid me in the shadows. You made your choice, Lily, I said softly. You wanted to live in a world of illusion. You wanted a normal life filled with fake leather and fake wine. Well, this is the reality of that world. When the bill comes due, it comes due in full. But I am your daughter, she cried, taking a step toward me. Yes, you are, I said, stepping back so she could not touch my jacket. And my door in Montana will always be open to my daughter. But not to his wife. When you decide which one you are, you know where to find me. Until then, you can pack your bags. You have 4 hours. I turned away from the table. I did not look back. I walked out of the dining room, my boots echoing loudly on the fake marble floor. I walked out the front door and down the driveway, leaving the screaming, the crying, and the shattered illusions behind me. I walked down the dark street until I reached my truck. I climbed into the cab. It smelled like diesel and old coffee. It smelled like hard work. It smelled like truth. I turned the key. The engine roared to life with a loud, comforting bang. I put the truck in gear and drove away into the night. Thank you for listening to my story. The journey has been incredibly difficult, fraught with deep pain and profound betrayal, but I emerged on the other side stronger, wiser, and absolutely free. If you find yourself in a similar situation, facing the heartbreaking deception of those you love and trust, remember my words. Do not ever let them break you. Do not ever let them steal your dignity. Fight back with everything you have, and never surrender your power to those who seek to destroy you. The world is full of ruthless predators, masking their true intentions behind fake smiles and empty promises. But you are not a victim. You are a survivor. You possess the unwavering strength to weather the storm, the courage to face the truth, and the resilience to carefully rebuild your beautiful life from the cold ashes. I am Harrison Bennett. I played the game, I set the trap, and I won the ultimate victory. Not with simple money, but with profound truth, unyielding justice, and the fierce determination to secure my life. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never let anyone see you bleed.